third ID, at first I was like, this is awful. Like I'm down at the motor pool changing oil and breaking track on a tank on Mondays. Like that's my Monday, every Monday. But what ended up happening was, so post First Gulf War, remember we did we controlled all the airspace over Iraq and we patrolled the airspace. Well, somewhere in that phase was called Operation Desert Thunder, which is Saddam was being goofy again. So we shut down the airspace again, and then we launched all of these like exercises in the desert of Kuwait to sort of a show of force and remind him like, we'll come beat you down again if you act a fool. So we ended up deploying like an entire mechanized brigade ended up deploying. I think they called it like Operation Intrinsic Action on our side, but it was the overarching thing was called Operation Desert Thunder. We got an expeditionary medal for that. Even though it was like peacetime and we weren't at war with anybody, we forward deployed to Kuwait right on the border of Iraq. But what it turned into was 6 months of living in the desert, building, I think they called them Kabuls or something, but it was basically a dirt bermed giant compound. We erected all the tents, we filled all the sandbags, basically cradle to grave from nothing but flat desert to an entire FOB, for lack of a better term, forward operating base, and then conducted maneuvers out of there. And what we had was, so all of the war stock from the first Gulf War was still in Kuwait. So we had ammunition and artillery rounds and mortar rounds for days. So for this 6 month period, we did live fire stuff like literally like 4 and 5 times a week. I shot more rounds in that 6 months than probably most guys that spent an entire career in an infantry mortar unit ever shot. And it was because it was this big demonstration of force. So we got really good at what we did. So even with the studs and the duds in the platoon that I was in, we turned into a really effective, cohesive unit because we had nothing to do but train. We were sitting in the desert forward deployed like we were prepping to go to war tomorrow.
Damn.
And it turned out for me, like leadership-wise, it turned out to be a great experience. Understanding what being deployed felt like and being away from your family and, as a young guy, filling sandbags and burning shit, all the uncomfortable stuff that goes with it, that did suck at the time. But when you look back on years later, you're like, man, I'm lucky that happened. Like very few people get an opportunity like that.
Yeah.
So it turned out to be really good. And then came back from that. I'm sorry.
Did a lot of the guys look up to you because you came from the regiment?
Yeah, I think that made it easier. I think the leadership, the NCOs saw early that I had been exposed to good leaders and that I was hungry and motivated more so than a lot of the guys that they were used to. So they sort of took to me. The younger guys did have more respect for you because as far as they were concerned, you were an Army Ranger. It didn't matter that you left. You had done that and they hadn't. So they definitely looked up to you. But I sort of aggressively pursued leadership roles when I was there. Once I figured out I could, like that I could be the PT stud and push other guys to excel in physical fitness, and that I could lead and make guys go train and do the right thing. Like I saw that leadership like that. I saw that younger guys responded to it, and I saw an opportunity to get myself back on track, and I pursued it.
That's awesome. I wasn't expecting you to say that the leadership liked you, because a lot of guys that come from a unit like that go to conventional side, and then there's some insecurities that come out in the leadership because you came from a SOF unit.
Well, funny story. I've told this one other time. So when I first got there, my platoon sergeant, and if he ever hears one of these things, I hope to God the man finds me on social media and reaches out to me, because I love him to death to this day and I think really highly of him. But he was a master sergeant, so in a mortar platoon, it was real rank heavy. You had an E8 platoon sergeant, which was rare. You had 2 E7 section sergeants and then a bunch of E6s and E5s, et cetera, et cetera. And he was our platoon sergeant. And so I show up day one, sign into the unit in processing or whatever, and I finally get to my platoon. And he brings me into his platoon office, and he's sitting at the desk, and he's this giant man. Master Sergeant Donald P. Blackman. Huge, NFL lineman sized dude. On the overweight side, NFL lineman sized dude. Right? And I say that lovingly. But he's like, have a seat, and he's talking to me. And he said some cool things in the beginning. He's like, hey, I want you to I don't want you to beat yourself up. Like, you're a 19-year-old kid. You made a mistake. You got spanked for it. Learn your lesson, grow from it, and move on. He's like, I'm not going to carry that into this. I'm not going to hold it over your head. No one's going to look down on you, and I'm not going to let them look down on you. Like, he said some really positive things. And then he paused and he said, I want to ask you a few questions. I said, okay. And he said, Ranger Battalion. I was never in the Ranger Battalion. He's like, but, I've seen them, and I know what they've done in the past and learned a little about them. And I said, yes, Sergeant. And he said, there's not a lot of black fellas in the Ranger Regiment. And he was a black guy. And I said, no, Sergeant, there's not. And I'm scared, right? Like, before we even started, even though he had said all these positive things, like, he buttered me up to ask me something difficult. So I'm a little nervous. And he said, not a lot of black fellas in the regiment, huh? And I said, no, Sergeant, there's not. He said, how many black guys do you think are in the Ranger Regiment? How many black guys are in 3rd Ranger Battalion? I said, 4. Just like that. And he jumped in his seat and he went, there's only 4? And I go, well, I mean, when you're in the dining facility, Sergeant, it's not that hard. Like, there's just not that many guys. I said, I think there's 4. And he goes, huh. And he leans forward in his chair and he leans over the desk to close the distance and he says, why do you think that is? And I thought, in probably a split that second, my brain went, shit. If I say whatever, he's gonna know that I'm lying to him, and I've now set the conditions for our relationship for the rest of my time here. If I tell him what I really think, he might punch me in the face, or he might respect what I have to say. And so I rolled the dice, and I said, I'm just going to tell him the truth, or at least what I really think to be the truth. Remember, I was an ocean lifeguard. And I said, honestly, Sergeant, I think it's because black guys have trouble passing the swim test. And he paused, and then he busted out laughing, and he said, you're goddamn right, I can't swim a lick.
Holy shit.
And we had a laugh, and he said, right then and there, he said, you're all right, Van Zant. He's like, I like you, and I think you're going to do just fine. And so fast forward a while later in the platoon, and we, one night in Kuwait, we had a long conversation about it. He's like, yeah, man. He's like, they come from different places. He's like, but a lot of black guys that end up in the service, they grew up in the inner city or they grew up someplace where they didn't have pools, they didn't have access, they didn't swim.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So you can call it a stereotype. Nowadays it's like people will come after you if you said something like that. There was nothing racist or anything in any of that. It was matter of fact, and it was true to the regiment and in a lot of units. And I think they came up with ways to combat that. Like, yeah, you know what? We do have some people that grow up and don't swim, so let's afford them an opportunity to learn and to practice so they can be successful in some of those courses and they're not limited by their background or experience prior service. So yeah, it was a funny moment that led to a much deeper relationship and a more honest relationship between the two of us. And he was a really good leader. Like, he was a smart guy. He pushed us when we were in the desert. He genuinely cared about the Army and he cared about me, and I knew that. And same with, my battalion commander that basically talked me into staying in the service. Those guys took a personal interest in me as a human being, and it stuck with me forever. Like, as a leader, and then even now, you can have an impact on a single individual's life, sometimes just with the words that you use.
Yeah. And
showing them that you care or taking the time to listen to their story or to share yours can make a difference in their life for, fucking 10, 20 years to come. And those are just a couple examples of people that had an impact on me that early after a mistake that changed the course of what I did.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.